Congratulations, you've just woken up in ancient Rome around 73 BCE. The morning sun warms your face as you open your eyes, and for a moment, there's peace. That's the good news. The bad news? You're a slave in the world's most powerful empire, and your day is about to begin in ways you never imagined. Your name is Thracius, and you've only been in Rome for 3 months. Before that, you lived in Thrace, a region in what you might know today as parts of Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. You weren't born a slave. No, you were once free, with a family, a trade as a blacksmith, and a small plot of land that had been in your family for generations. But then Rome's legions came to your village during their eastern campaigns. The clash of iron, the screams of your neighbors, the smoke rising from burning homes, these memories still haunt your dreams. When the battle ended, the survivors, including you, were chained together and marched hundreds of miles to be sold in Rome's bustling slave markets. That's how most slaves in Rome began their journey, as prisoners of war from Rome's ever-expanding borders. As you rise from your straw pallet on the hard stone floor of your master's ergastulum, you know, a slave dormitory, you rub the iron collar around your neck. It's not particularly heavy, but its presence is a constant reminder of who, or rather what, you are now considered to be. Under Roman law, you're not a person, but a thing, a piece of property, what the Romans call instrumentum vocale, a tool that can speak. Your master, Marcus Lentulus Batiatus, runs a ludus, a gladiatorial training school in Capua, about 120 miles southeast of Rome. You're still new, so you haven't been selected for gladiator training yet. Instead, you work maintaining the facility, cleaning, cooking, repairing equipment, and attending to the needs of the gladiators. The good news is that you're skilled with metal from your days as a blacksmith. The bad news is that your master has noticed this skill and is considering either putting you to work forging weapons full-time, or perhaps worse, training you as a gladiator yourself. As you splash cold water on your face from a basin, other slaves begin to stir around you. There's Diona, a Greek woman captured when Romans sacked her coastal town. She works in the kitchen and sometimes slips you extra food when the overseer isn't looking. Then there's Gallus, an older Gaul who's been enslaved for over 20 years. He tends to the training yard and sometimes whispers stories of the world beyond Rome. And there's young Cyrus, barely 12, born to a slave mother in this very ludus. He knows no other life but service. Unlike many modern conceptions of slavery, Rome's system wasn't based on race or skin color. Slaves came from everywhere Rome conquered: Gaul, Hispania, Greece, Syria, Britannia, North Africa, and more. What mattered wasn't where you came from, but your status as property, and property you certainly are. The overseer's whip cracks in the air. Up, all of you. The sun doesn't wait, and neither does your work, he shouts. His name is Servius, and despite being a freedman himself, a former slave who earned his freedom, he's particularly harsh on the slaves under his supervision. Perhaps it's because he wants to distance himself from his past, or maybe it's because cruelty to those below him is the only power he's ever known. You quickly pull on your simple tunic, rough-spun wool that barely reaches your knees, and rush outside with the others. The good news is that you're allowed clothing. The bad news is that it marks you immediately as a slave. The short, poor-quality tunic is a visible symbol of your status that anyone in Rome would recognize instantly. The morning ritual begins with a roll call. Each slave must respond when their name is called, and woe to anyone who's late. Yesterday, a slave named Theseus was slow to appear, and Servius had him flogged 10 lashes. He's working today despite the wounds on his back. There's no rest for a slave who can still stand. Thracius, Servius calls, and you step forward, eyes downcast as expected. "Present, overseer," you respond, careful to use the proper title. Servius nods curtly and moves on to the next name. When the count is complete, he divides everyone into their work groups for the day. You're assigned to help the armorer, given your skills with metal. At least today you won't be cleaning the latrines or hauling water from the well. Small mercies in a life with few choices. As you walk to the smithy, you pass the training yard where gladiators are already beginning their morning exercises. These men are slaves too, but of a different sort. While most slaves, like you, lead lives of drudgery and anonymity, gladiators achieve a strange kind of fame. The good news is that successful gladiators can earn prize money, respect, and eventually even freedom. The bad news is that they must repeatedly risk death and brutal combat to achieve it. Among the practicing gladiators, one man stands out. His name is Spartacus, a Thracian like you. He arrived just a few weeks before you did, but already his skill with weapons has impressed the trainers. There are rumors that he was once a soldier, perhaps even fighting in an auxiliary unit of the Roman army before deserting or being captured. Whatever his past, he's now the rising star of Batiatus's Ludus. Spartacus catches your eye as you pass, and for a moment, there's a flash of recognition. Not that he knows you personally, but a recognition of shared homeland, of shared fate. He gives you an almost imperceptible nod before returning to his training. Something about his demeanor suggests a man who hasn't fully accepted his circumstances, despite the chains. At the smithy, you're put to work immediately. The armorer, an old Roman named Titus, isn't a slave but a paid craftsman who appreciates your knowledge of metalworking. "You've got good hands, Thracian," he says, as he shows you how to repair a damaged gladius, the short sword used by many fighters. Shame they're not free hands. Titus is kinder than most Romans you've encountered. The good news is that not all Romans are cruel to slaves. Some, like Titus, treat them almost as people. The bad news is that even the kindest Romans still view slavery as natural and necessary, a simple fact of life no more questionable than the rising sun. As you work the bellows and hammer heated metal, Titus explains the different types of gladiators you'll be making weapons for. The Murmillo fights with this gladius and carries a large rectangular shield. The Thraex, named after your people, you know, uses a curved short sword and a small round shield. The Retiarius fights with a net and trident, while the Secutor is armored specifically to counter him. You listen and learn, filing away this knowledge. Perhaps understanding the weapons might save your life someday, whether as a gladiator yourself or, well, you don't let yourself think too far ahead yet. By midday, your arms ache from the smithy work, but there's no real break. Slaves eat quickly, a simple meal of coarse bread, some olive oil, and perhaps a bit of bean porridge if you're lucky. The good news is that most Roman masters feed their slaves adequately. The bad news is that this isn't from kindness, but practicality. A starving slave can't work efficiently. As you eat, huddled with the other slaves in the shade of the kitchen wall, Gallus leans close to you. "Tonight," he whispers, so quietly you almost miss it. After dark, the tall cypress. Be there if you want to hear. Before you can ask what he means, he's moved away, leaving you puzzled. But the gleam in his eyes suggests something important, perhaps even dangerous. The afternoon brings more work, repairing metal fittings on gladiator armor. From the training yard, you hear the crack of wooden practice swords and the trainers shouting instructions, occasionally punctuated by cries of pain. Training to be a gladiator isn't for the faint-hearted. It's brutal conditioning designed to prepare men for mortal combat. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the Ludus grounds, You're finally allowed to finish your work. Your back aches, your hands are blistered despite your experience with metal, and fatigue weighs heavy on your limbs. But this is just one day of what might be a lifetime of servitude, unless something changes. Slaves in Rome could hope for freedom through several paths. Some masters freed loyal slaves in their wills. Others allowed slaves to save money and eventually purchase their freedom. Some slaves earned freedom through exceptional service. But these were the lucky few. Most lived and died as property, their lives entirely at the whim of their owners. After a meager evening meal, slaves are allowed a few hours of rest before sleep. This is when they can talk quietly among themselves, mend clothing, or simply sit in exhausted silence. Some pray to their homeland gods, though slaves are expected to worship the Roman gods of their masters. Some slaves were even used in religious ceremonies, their status making them appropriate servants for certain deities. You remember Gallus's mysterious invitation and make your way cautiously toward the tall cypress tree at the edge of the property. It's risky to be out after dark, but your curiosity overcomes your caution. Near the cypress, you find a small group of slaves gathered in the shadows, speaking in hushed tones. Gallus nods when he sees you approach and makes space in the circle. "Our new Thracian has joined us," he says quietly. "Good. We were just discussing news from the outside." "What news?" you ask, voice barely above a whisper. "There's been another slave revolt in Sicily," says a man named Alexandros, a Greek scribe who works in Batiatus's office and therefore has access to messages and correspondence. "The second one in 30 years. Thousands of slaves took control of large parts of the island before the Romans finally crushed them. The news sends a murmur through the small group. Slave revolts are rare but terrifying to the Romans. Their entire economy and way of life depends on the compliance of a massive enslaved population that outnumbers them in many regions." "It won't be the last," says another voice, and you're surprised to see Spartacus himself standing at the edge of the gathering. His presence commands immediate attention and respect. The Romans believe themselves invincible, but every empire has its weaknesses. "Dangerous talk," warns Gallus, though there's no rebuke in his tone. Spartacus shrugs. "What can they do to us that they haven't already done? Take our freedom, our homeland, our families?" His eyes scan the gathered faces. "We have nothing left to lose but our lives, and those are hardly worth living as they are." You feel a chill at his words, not because you disagree, but because of the burning conviction behind them. This is not idle complaint. There's something deeper brewing here. "We're not here to plan rebellion," Gallus says quickly, perhaps for the benefit of any who might be informants. "Just to share news and company. Remember that." The gathering disperses soon after, each slave returning to their sleeping area before they're missed. But as you lie on your straw pallet that night, Spartacus's words echo in your mind. What can they do to us that they haven't already done? Sleep comes fitfully, filled with dreams of home, and freedom mingled with nightmares of chains and arena sand stained with blood. This is the reality of a slave in Rome. Even your dreams aren't your own. Days pass in much the same routine. Wake before dawn, work until dusk, eat enough to survive, sleep, repeat. The rhythm of slave life is designed to break the spirit through relentless monotony, punctuated by fear of punishment. The good news is that humans are remarkably adaptable. The bad news is that adapting to slavery means losing pieces of yourself day by day. You continue to attend the secret gatherings by the cypress tree when you can. Sometimes there's news from the outside world, reports of pirate raids along the coast, whispers of tribal rebellions in Gaul, rumors of political machinations in Rome itself. Other times, the slaves simply share stories of their homelands, keeping their cultures alive in whispered tales after dark. Spartacus isn't always present, but when he is, the energy of the gathering changes. Other slaves look to him instinctively, drawn to his quiet strength and unwavering dignity despite his chains. You begin to understand why, in a world designed to strip people of their humanity, Spartacus has somehow held on to his. One evening, about 2 months after your arrival at the Ludus, Spartacus approaches you directly as you work in the smithy. "Your work is good," he says, nodding toward the sword you're repairing. "In Thrace, were you a smith?" "Yes," you answer, surprised by the direct question. "My father taught me, and his father before him." Spartacus nods thoughtfully, a useful skill, one that makes things that can both build and destroy. He runs a finger along the edge of the blade. The Romans have forgotten that everything they use to control us can also be used against them. Before you can respond, he's gone, leaving you with a strange mixture of hope and dread. Something is coming. You can feel it in the air, like the stillness before a storm. That night, you're awakened by a hand shaking your shoulder gently but urgently. It's Spartacus, with several other gladiators behind him. "Now," he whispers, "if you want freedom, come now." Your heart pounds as you realize what's happening. This is no drill, no secret meeting. This is the beginning of something that could mean either freedom or death, possibly both. Without hesitation, you rise and follow. Throughout the slaves' quarters, others are being roused. Not all, but those who have been deemed trustworthy. In all, perhaps 70 or 80 slaves gather in the training yard, armed with kitchen knives, tools, and a few proper weapons that somehow found their way out of the armory. Spartacus addresses the group, his voice low but clear. "Tonight we take back what's ours, our freedom. We'll overpower the guards, take their weapons, and escape. Once free of this place, we make for Mount Vesuvius, where we can defend ourselves and gather strength. The Romans will hunt us," someone points out. "Let them," Spartacus replies with a grim smile. "I'd rather die a free man on a mountainside than live another day as someone's property." A murmur of agreement passes through the group. This is madness, but it's also perhaps the only chance many of these people will ever have at freedom. "Anyone who doesn't wish to join us can return to their beds now," Spartacus continues. "We won't force anyone to fight, and we won't harm those who stay." No one moves. Whatever fears they harbor about the revolt's chances, the possibility of freedom outweighs them all. "Then let's begin," Spartacus says, raising a stolen gladius. "For freedom." The revolt erupts with surprising speed and efficiency. The night guards, few in number and complacent in their routine, are quickly overwhelmed. Keys are taken, more weapons secured, and suddenly the balance of power shifts. You find yourself fighting alongside men and women who hours ago were beaten down in spirit and body, but now move with the desperate energy of those with everything to gain. The clash of metal, the shouts of alarm, the rush of adrenaline, it's terrifying and exhilarating all at once. By dawn, the Ludus of Batiatus is in the hands of the slaves. Some masters and guards lie dead. Others are locked in the very cells they once used to punish disobedient slaves. The gladiators, trained fighters all, form the core of what is rapidly becoming not just an escape, but a rebellion. Standing in the courtyard as the rising sun illuminates your first moments of freedom, you look around at the faces of your fellow rebels. There's fear there, certainly. What you've done guarantees a terrible punishment if captured, but there's something else too. Dignity restored, humanity reclaimed. Spartacus addresses the gathered rebels once more. "This is just the beginning. Rome will send soldiers against us. We must be ready. We go to Vesuvius, where the terrain will help us defend ourselves. Along the way, we free every slave we encounter who wishes to join us. We take food, weapons, and supplies from the villas of the rich. This is no longer just an escape. This is war. A cheer rises from the crowd, though you note that some look uncertain at this escalation. Escaping to freedom is one thing. Waging war against Rome itself is quite another. As the rebels prepare to leave the ludus, gathering supplies and organizing into groups, you find yourself at a crossroads. The path ahead promises hardship and danger with only slim hope of actual freedom. The Romans do not forgive slave revolts. They crush them with brutal efficiency and make examples of the participants. Yet the alternative, to somehow avoid joining the rebellion and remain a slave, is unthinkable now that you've tasted these few moments of freedom. The collar around your neck seems to tighten at the very thought of continuing in bondage. You make your choice quickly, gathering what useful tools and weapons you can. Whatever lies ahead, you will face it as a person, not as property. As the rebels move out of the ludus, you fall in alongside them, leaving behind the life of a slave and stepping into the uncertain future of a rebel against Rome. The good news is that you're free, at least for now. The bad news? You've just made an enemy of the most powerful empire the world has ever known. And as you march toward Mount Vesuvius with this growing army of the formerly enslaved, you can't help but wonder how many of you will live to enjoy the freedom you've just seized. And what does freedom even mean in a world where Rome's long shadow touches every corner? These questions will have to wait. For now, there's ground to cover, more slaves to free, and defenses to prepare. The third servile war has begun, and you're no longer just Thracius the slave. You're Thracius the rebel, writing your own story in defiance of those who would own your very existence. The night falls over your first day of freedom as you make camp in the hills. Tomorrow brings uncertainty, but for this moment, under the same stars that shine over your distant homeland, you are your own master. And despite the dangers ahead, that knowledge allows you to sleep more peacefully than you have in months. Dawn breaks over your makeshift camp, golden light filtering through the trees as you and your fellow rebels prepare for the journey ahead. Mount Vesuvius looms in the distance, your destination and potential sanctuary. The mountain is still decades away from the famous eruption that will one day destroy Pompeii, but its steep slopes and rugged terrain make it a natural fortress against Roman forces. Spartacus moves through the camp, speaking with small groups, organizing and encouraging. He has a natural talent for leadership that transcends his former status as a slave. The gladiators form the core of your fighting force, but most of the escaped slaves, including you, have little or no combat training. The good news is that many have useful skills from their enslavement: blacksmithing, carpentry, cooking, farming, and medicine. The bad news is that skills alone won't stop Roman spears. We need to train everyone who can fight, Spartacus announces as the camp prepares to move out, and we need more weapons. The Romans won't give us time to prepare at our leisure. He's right about that. Already, word of your escape must be spreading. Batiatus, if he survived the uprising, will have sent messengers to local authorities. The Romans take slave revolts very seriously. Their entire economic and social system depends on keeping the enslaved population under control. As you break camp and begin the day's march, you find yourself walking alongside Diona, the Greek kitchen slave who sometimes slipped you extra food. "I never thought I'd be doing this," she says, adjusting the small pack of supplies on her back. 5 years I've been a slave, always keeping my head down, just trying to survive each day. Now look at us. Do you regret coming? You ask, curious about how others view this dangerous gamble for freedom. She shakes her head firmly. No, even if it ends badly, at least I'll die having made a choice. That's something they could never give us as slaves. real choices. Her words resonate with you. In Roman slavery, choice is perhaps the first thing that's stripped away. Slaves have no legal right to decide anything about their lives, not where they live, who they marry, what work they do, or even whether they have children. Female slaves are particularly vulnerable, with no legal protection against sexual assault by their masters. The column of rebels moves steadily through the countryside, avoiding main roads and skirting populated areas where possible. Scouts, mostly former gladiators with keen eyes and quick feet, range ahead and to the sides, watching for danger or opportunity. By midday, your group encounters its first test. The scouts return with news of a small Roman patrol ahead, perhaps a dozen soldiers escorting a wagon train of supplies toward Capua. Spartacus calls the gladiators together quickly, formulating a plan. You're included in this council not because you're a fighter, but because your blacksmithing knowledge might be useful in assessing the weapons you could potentially capture. They don't know about us yet, Spartacus explains. They're just a regular patrol. If we move quickly and decisively, we can overwhelm them before they can organize a defense. The plan is simple but effective. A small group of rebels will appear to be travelers in distress, drawing the patrol's attention. When the Romans approach, the main force will emerge from hiding and attack from multiple directions. As the patrol comes into view, you watch from the cover of trees, heart pounding. The Roman soldiers look formidable in their organized formation, with their uniform equipment and disciplined bearing. These are exactly the force that conquered your homeland and so many others. But today, they're outnumbered. The ambush works perfectly. The Romans, surprised and surrounded, put up fierce resistance but are quickly overwhelmed. Within minutes, the skirmish is over. 3 rebels lie dead, but all of the Roman soldiers have been killed or captured. The supply wagons, containing food, weapons, and other valuable goods, are now in rebel hands. This small victory energizes the group, but Spartacus remains cautious. This was just a patrol, he reminds everyone. Soon they'll send legions against us, real legions, with thousands of trained soldiers. We need to reach Vesuvius and prepare. The captured equipment is quickly distributed. You examine the Roman swords, shields, and armor with professional interest. The craftsmanship is excellent. Roman military equipment is standardized and well made, designed for efficient killing. Now these tools of oppression will serve the cause of freedom. The surviving Roman soldiers present a dilemma. Some rebels want to execute them as vengeance for their years of suffering under Roman rule. Others argue for releasing them with a message that the rebels fight only for freedom, not for blood. Spartacus listens to both sides before making his decision. "We're not Romans," he says finally. "We don't enslave our enemies or kill prisoners for sport. Release them, but take their armor and weapons. Let them return to their commanders with news that the slaves they thought broken have teeth." This merciful approach surprises you. In the arena, Spartacus was trained to kill without hesitation. As a slave, he suffered under Roman cruelty, yet he chooses not to replicate their brutality. It's a reminder that freedom isn't just about breaking chains. It's about choosing what kind of people you want to be once those chains are gone. The journey continues with renewed urgency. The encounter with the patrol means that soon, proper Roman forces will be mobilized against you. Every hour of travel, every new slave freed, every weapon acquired, strengthens your position for the conflict to come. As you travel, you begin to understand the true scope of Roman slavery. Nearly every villa and farm you pass uses slave labor. In some agricultural areas, slaves outnumber the free population significantly. The good news for your rebellion is that this provides a vast potential recruitment pool. The bad news is that many slaves are too afraid, too broken, or too conditioned to join your cause. When you approach rural estates, Spartacus sends small groups to liberate the slaves and gather supplies. Some masters flee at the first sign of armed rebels. Others attempt to resist and pay the price for their defiance. With each estate, your numbers grow, though not all choose to join you. Some slaves, particularly those born into slavery who know no other life, are terrified by the concept of freedom and its uncertainties. "I don't understand," you say to Gallus, as you watch an older slave refuse to leave his master's villa despite having the opportunity. "How can anyone choose to remain enslaved?" Gallus sighs, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. Fear is a powerful chain, perhaps stronger than iron. Some have been slaves so long they cannot imagine any other existence. The familiar suffering seems safer than unknown freedom. This psychological dimension of slavery is something you're just beginning to understand. The Romans don't maintain their slave system through physical force alone, though they certainly use plenty of that. They also employ a careful conditioning that makes slaves internalize their status, believe in their own inferiority, and fear the very freedom that should be their natural right. By nightfall, your rebel band has grown to nearly 300 strong and has acquired a decent cache of weapons, food, and supplies. Camp is made in a defensible position, with sentries posted and watches organized. Despite the day's success, there's a nervous energy in the air. Everyone knows that real Roman military response is coming. Around the campfires that night, you listen to the stories of your fellow rebels. Each has their own tale of how they came to be a slave in Rome's vast empire. An older man named Quintus was once a merchant who fell into debt and sold himself into slavery to protect his family. A young woman called Lucia was born to slave parents on a large agricultural estate, never knowing freedom until today. A boy no more than 15, Marcus, was abandoned as an infant and raised as a household slave. The diversity of backgrounds reminds you that Roman slavery was a complex system with many paths to bondage. Unlike later historical slavery systems that targeted specific ethnic groups, Rome enslaved people from all conquered territories and social classes. What united slaves in Rome wasn't their origin, but their legal status as human property. This status had profound implications for daily life. Roman slaves could be bought and sold at their master's whim, separating families without recourse. They could be punished physically without legal protection. A master who killed their own slave faced little or no consequence. They could be used sexually without consent. They could be forced to fight to the death for entertainment. They had no right to marry legally, though some masters permitted informal unions. Any children born to slave women automatically became slaves themselves, regardless of who the father was. As you share these reflections with those around your campfire, the conversation turns to what freedom might look like if your rebellion succeeds. "I want land," says a former agricultural slave named Titus. "Just a small plot, enough to feed my family without answering to any master." "I want to go home," says a woman from Gaul. "I was taken from my village 10 years ago. I don't even know if my children still live." "I want revenge," says another, his face scarred from repeated beatings. "For every lash I took, I want Roman blood." Spartacus, passing by your fire, pauses to listen. "All worthy desires," he says. "But first, we must survive. Freedom means nothing if we're dead or recaptured." He sits with your group, accepting a cup of watered wine. Despite his leadership position, he makes no effort to separate himself from the common rebels. This, you realize, is another difference between your rebellion and Roman society. Here, worth is determined by contribution and character, not by arbitrary status. "What do you want, Spartacus?" someone asks. "If we win this fight against Rome, what then?" Spartacus considers the question, turning the cup in his hands. "I want to break the system that makes some men masters and others slaves," he says finally. "I want a world where no one wears chains, where no human is another's property." He looks around at the expectant faces. "But that's a distant dream. For now, I want us to reach Vesuvius, build our strength, and show Rome that we are not animals to be bought and sold, but people willing to die for our freedom." His words bring murmurs of agreement. It's a modest ambition for now, survival and dignity, but one that resonates deeply with everyone present. As the night grows deeper, you find yourself on sentry duty alongside a former house slave named Cassius. Unlike many of the others, he can read and write, skills he was taught to help manage his master's household accounts. What was it like, you ask him, being a house slave rather than working in the fields or mines? Cassius gives a bitter laugh. Easier on the body, harder on the soul. I ate better than field slaves, slept in the house instead of a barracks, but I was never out of my master's sight, never had a moment that was truly my own. He gestures to a small scar on his cheek. And when I made mistakes, the punishment was still swift. Different masters, different conditions, but always the same truth. We were possessions, not people. This was the reality for Rome's estimated 2 to 3 million slaves. Whether they served in urban households, rural estates, mines, or public works, their fundamental status remained the same. Some were treated relatively well, others subjected to unimaginable cruelty, but all lived with the knowledge that their very existence depended on the whims of their owners. The next morning brings new challenges. Scouts return with reports of Roman response. A militia of about 3,000 men has been hastily assembled under the command of a praetor named Gaius Claudius Glaber. They're moving in your direction, clearly intent on crushing the rebellion before it can grow further. 3,000 against our few hundred, Gallus says, shaking his head. Even with our gladiators, those aren't good odds. Spartacus seems unconcerned. "We won't face them on open ground," he says. "That's what they expect, and that's how they always win. Disciplined formations against disorganized enemies. We'll use different tactics." The march toward Vesuvius takes on new urgency. By midday, your band reaches the lower slopes of the mountain and begins to ascend toward more defensible positions. The terrain grows steeper, the paths narrower, good ground for defenders, difficult for attackers, especially those in formation. As you climb, Spartacus explains his strategy to the group leaders. "The Romans will follow us up the main path. They're arrogant and think us simple escapees with no military knowledge. They won't expect strategy from slaves." He points to a narrow passage between two rocky outcroppings. "We'll make our camp visible from below, let them see our fires at night. They'll come up this path thinking to surprise us. Instead, we'll surprise them from above and behind." It's a sound plan that takes advantage of your smaller numbers and the terrain. The good news is that many of the rebels, including you, know these mountains from gathering wood and hunting for your master's tables. The bad news is that if the plan fails, there's nowhere to retreat. The next day is spent preparing. Fighting positions are established. Crude but effective weapons are fashioned for those without proper arms, and everyone of fighting age receives basic instruction from the gladiators. You work with other craftspeople to repair and improve weapons, turning farming tools into instruments of war when necessary. By nightfall, everything is ready. As planned, campfires are lit in visible locations, creating the impression of a careless rebel camp. In truth, most of your force is hidden in positions along the path and above it, waiting in tense silence. Sleep is impossible as you wait with the others, a repurposed farm tool gripped tightly in your hands. You've never killed anyone before. The gladiators have. It was their enforced profession. But for most of the rebels, including you, this will be a first taste of combat, not as sport, but as survival. Dawn is just breaking when the sentries give the signal. Roman forces are moving up the path. Glaber has taken the bait, bringing his militia up the narrow trail in a long column, unable to form their usual battle formations in the constricted space. You watch from your hiding place as the Romans advance, their red cloaks and gleaming armor marking them clearly against the rocky ground. They move with confidence, clearly expecting to find a disorganized camp of slaves they can easily overwhelm. When the signal comes, a bird call that could easily be mistaken for natural wildlife, the trap is sprung. Rebels emerge from hiding positions all along the path, attacking from above with rocks and javelins, from the sides with makeshift spears and captured Roman swords. The Romans, caught in the narrow defile, cannot maneuver effectively. Their superior numbers become a liability as they crowd together, unable to bring their weapons to bear. Panic spreads through their ranks as rebels attack from directions they never expected. You find yourself in the midst of chaos, striking out at armored men who, hours ago, would have commanded your absolute obedience. There's a strange power in the reversal, the hunted becoming hunters, the owned becoming owners of their fate. The battle is surprisingly brief. The Roman militia, despite their advantages in equipment and training, are thoroughly routed. Many are killed, others throw down their weapons and flee back down the mountain. Glaber himself barely escapes with his life, his authority and reputation in tatters. When the fighting ends, the rebels find themselves in possession of the battlefield and, more importantly, the Romans' abandoned equipment. Hundreds of proper weapons, armor sets, and supplies now belong to the rebellion. It's a victory beyond what anyone dared hope for. Spartacus calls the rebels together amid the aftermath. Today, we've shown that slaves can fight and win against Roman arms, he announces, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. But this was just one battle. Rome will send more soldiers, better soldiers next time. We must use this victory to grow stronger. He outlines his plan: establish a defensible camp on Vesuvius, send groups to free more slaves from surrounding areas, train everyone in combat, and prepare for the inevitable Roman response. It's clear that what started as an escape has evolved into something much larger, a full-scale rebellion against Rome itself. As the day progresses and the camp takes shape, you find yourself working alongside others to fashion more weapons from captured Roman equipment. Your blacksmith skills are increasingly valuable, and you take pride in creating tools that might help secure freedom for yourself and others. You know they'll never let us go, says an older rebel working beside you, hammering a captured sword back into shape after it was damaged in the fight. Even if we wanted to just escape the Italian peninsula, they'd hunt us to the ends of the earth. Why, you ask, though you suspect you know the answer. Because we're more than just escaped property to them now, he replies. We're a symbol. If slaves can successfully rebel in the heart of Roman territory, what's to stop millions of others from doing the same? Our existence threatens the foundation of their society. He's right. Roman civilization is built on slave labor. Slaves work the vast agricultural estates that feed the empire. Slaves mine the metals that create Rome's wealth. Slaves build the roads, aqueducts, and buildings that demonstrate Roman engineering prowess. Slaves teach, heal, entertain, and serve in Roman households. Without slavery, the Roman economic and social system would collapse. That night, as fires burn throughout the rebel camp, there's celebration of the victory, but also preparation for what's to come. Weapons training continues, even by firelight. Scouts return with reports of more slaves joining your cause, swelling your numbers daily. Supply caches are established in hidden locations throughout the mountain. You sit with Diona and Gallus, sharing a meal of bread and dried meat taken from Roman supplies. Despite the day's success, a question weighs on your mind. What happens if we actually succeed, you ask? If we keep defeating Roman forces, then what? We can't defeat the entire empire. Gallus, who has seen more of life than most, shrugs. Perhaps not, but sometimes the victory is in the fighting itself. For every day we remain free, for every slave who joins us, for every Roman who fears us, that's already a kind of winning. Diona nods in agreement. Before today, Romans thought of slaves as docile, as broken. Now they'll look at every slave and wonder, is this one plotting rebellion too? That fear is a power we never had before. Their perspective helps you understand the larger significance of what you're part of. This rebellion isn't just about the freedom of a few hundred or even a few thousand individuals. It's a challenge to the entire concept of human bondage that underlies Roman society. In the days that follow, your rebel camp evolves into a surprisingly well-organized community. Different skills from your enslaved past become valuable in new ways. Former household slaves who can read and write help record inventories and organize supplies. Agricultural slaves apply their knowledge to finding and growing food. Those with medical training tend to the wounded. Meanwhile, the gladiators train everyone capable of fighting. Basic formations are taught, weapon skills developed, and the formerly enslaved begin to transform into a fighting force. It's not a Roman legion by any means. You lack the equipment, discipline, and decades of tradition, but it's becoming something formidable in its own right. Word continues to spread, and more slaves escape to join you. Some bring valuable intelligence about Roman movements or useful skills. Others simply bring their desire for freedom and willingness to fight for it. Within weeks, your numbers have grown from the original 70 or so gladiators to several thousand rebels. This growth brings challenges as well as strength. Feeding so many people in a mountain camp isn't easy. Different languages, cultures, and backgrounds sometimes create tensions. Leadership structures must evolve beyond Spartacus and his original gladiator companions to include representatives from various groups. Through it all, Spartacus maintains the respect and loyalty of the growing rebel army. He leads by example, trains alongside the newest recruits, and makes decisions transparently rather than through command. It's a different model of leadership than the rigid hierarchy of Rome, and it seems to work for this community of the formerly enslaved. About a month after your escape from the Ludus, scouts bring alarming news. Rome has dispatched a new force against you, not a hastily assembled militia this time, but 2 proper legions under the command of the consuls, Lucius Gellius Publicola and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Clodianus. This represents a significant escalation in Rome's response to your rebellion. Spartacus calls a council to discuss this development. You're included now, having proven your value not just as a blacksmith, but as someone with good judgment. The discussion is heated, with different factions advocating different approaches. We should split into smaller groups, argues one former house slave. Make ourselves harder to find and fight. No, we should attack them before they're ready, counters a gladiator. We use the same surprise tactics that worked against Glaber. We should try to negotiate, suggests another. Ask for free passage out of Roman territories in exchange for ending our raids. Spartacus listens to all viewpoints before sharing his own. Rome doesn't negotiate with slaves, he says simply, and splitting up makes us weaker, not stronger. As for attacking them directly, 2 full legions are a different enemy than Glaber's militia. He paces the center of the circle, considering options. We need to draw them into terrain where their numbers and formations won't help them. And we need to keep freeing slaves. Every pair of hands makes us stronger. Every empty villa makes Rome weaker. The strategy that emerges is bold. Continue to build your forces while conducting strategic raids on Roman targets, always avoiding direct confrontation with the legions on their terms. When forced to fight, choose the ground carefully to negate Roman advantages. This approach proves successful in the weeks that follow. Small groups of rebels attack isolated estates and outposts, freeing slaves and gathering supplies before disappearing back into the countryside. When Roman forces give chase, they find themselves led into ambushes or exhausted in fruitless pursuits. Your reputation grows with each success. What began as a local disturbance is now recognized as a serious threat. More slaves risk everything to join you, drawn by stories of the growing rebel army that dares to challenge Rome itself. For you personally, these months bring transformation. The skills you developed as a blacksmith serve you well, but you've also learned to fight, to lead small groups on raids, to make decisions that affect others' lives. The man who woke up as property less than 3 months ago now helps shape the future of thousands. One evening, as you finish repairing weapons damaged in a recent skirmish, Spartacus approaches your work area. He examines a sword you've just finished, testing its balance with an expert's hand. "Good work," he says with approval. "Sharp edge, strong blade. A weapon worthy of freedom." "Thank you," you reply, wondering why the rebellion's leader has sought you out personally. Spartacus sits on a nearby stump, still turning the sword in his hands. "Tomorrow we face our biggest test yet. Our scouts report that both consular armies are converging near Placentia. They think they've trapped us between them." You nod, having heard rumors of this development. "What will we do?" "What they don't expect," Spartacus says with a grim smile. "We're going to attack one army before the other can join it. Hit them with everything we have, then disappear before the second force arrives." It's an audacious plan, betting everything on the element of surprise and the growing skill of your rebel fighters. If it works, you'll have defeated a consular army, something unthinkable for a force of former slaves. If it fails, the rebellion might end then and there. "I want you with the main attack force," Spartacus continues. "Your skills are needed both for fighting and for what comes after, when weapons need repair." The trust implicit in this assignment fills you with both pride and trepidation. You're no longer just supporting the rebellion, you're at its heart. That night, few in the camp sleep soundly. Tomorrow's battle could change everything, for better or worse. As you lie awake, staring at the stars through the trees, you reflect on the journey that brought you here, from free Thracian to Roman slave to rebel fighter. Your life has transformed completely in less than a year. Whatever happens tomorrow, you know you can never return to chains. Death would be preferable to slavery now that you've tasted freedom again. Dawn comes too quickly, gray light filtering through morning mist as the rebel army assembles. There's nervous energy in the air, but also determination. These people are fighting not just for their lives, but for their humanity, for the right to exist as more than property. Spartacus moves among the gathered fighters, offering encouragement and last-minute advice. When he reaches you, he clasps your shoulder firmly. "Remember," he says, "they fight because they're ordered to. We fight because we choose to. That makes us stronger." With these words echoing in your mind, you march with the rebel army toward what could be either your greatest victory or your final stand against the might of Rome. The good news is that you face this moment as a free person, making your own choices. The bad news? Those choices might lead to your death before the sun sets today, but as you march in formation with your fellow rebels, weapons ready and spirits determined, you realize that even this bad news contains a kind of victory. A slave dies at another's whim, but you will live or die by your own choice, fighting for freedom rather than serving in chains. And in that knowledge, there is a power that even mighty Rome cannot take away. Morning mist clings to the valleys as your rebel army approaches the Roman force. Through gaps in the trees, you catch glimpses of red cloaks and gleaming armor, one of the two consular armies, camped in what they believe is a secure position. The good news is that they don't expect an attack from mere slaves. The bad news is that these are professional soldiers, not the hastily assembled militia you faced before. Spartacus has divided your forces into 3 groups. The largest will attack the Roman front directly, while 2 smaller forces circle to hit the flanks simultaneously. You're with the main group, your repaired sword gripped tightly, your heart pounding. The signal comes, a horn blast that cuts through the morning quiet, and suddenly the carefully planned attack erupts into chaos. Thousands of rebels charge from the forest edge, screaming battle cries in dozens of languages. The Romans, caught during their morning meal preparations, scramble to form defensive lines. What follows is a blur of violence and noise, unlike anything you've experienced. The disciplined formations that make Roman legions so effective on open battlefields work against them in this surprise attack. Your forces crash into their partially formed lines, creating gaps that are quickly exploited. You find yourself fighting alongside former gladiators, their trained precision a stark contrast to your own desperate swings. A Roman soldier lunges at you, his gladius aiming for your chest. You parry instinctively, the skills learned in training sessions paying off. Your counterstrike catches him under the arm, finding the gap in his armor. The look of shock on his face as he falls, that a slave could kill a Roman soldier, will stay with you forever. Around you, the battle rages. The Romans recover from their initial surprise and begin to organize more effective resistance. For a moment, it seems the tide might turn against you. Then the flanking forces hit from both sides simultaneously, sending the Roman lines into disarray once more. Consul Gellius attempts to rally his troops, but the momentum has shifted decisively. What began as a Roman breakfast ends as a Roman rout. Soldiers throw down their weapons and flee. Others surrender, dropping to their knees before fighters they would have whipped without hesitation only months before. By midday, the battlefield belongs to the rebels. The cost has been high. Hundreds of your fellow fighters lie dead or wounded. But the Roman losses are far greater. An entire consular army has been defeated by an army of slaves. As you help gather weapons from the fallen, the magnitude of what you've accomplished begins to sink in. This wasn't just a skirmish or an ambush. This was a proper battle against Rome's main military force, and you won. The captured Roman soldiers present the same dilemma as before. Some rebels, fresh from the violence of battle, call for their execution. Others argue for mercy. Spartacus, blood-spattered from fighting at the front lines, makes the final decision. Disarm them, take their armor and supplies, but harm no prisoners, he commands. We fight for freedom, not vengeance. Let them return to Rome and tell their masters that slaves defeated a consular army in open battle. It's a powerful message, though you note that some rebels grumble at this mercy. Those who suffered the greatest cruelties as slaves often harbor the deepest desire for retribution. With the battle won, there's no time to celebrate. The second consular army under Lentulus will arrive soon, drawn by news of the fighting. Spartacus orders an immediate withdrawal, taking all captured weapons, armor, and supplies. The wounded are carried on improvised stretchers. No one is left behind. Your forces melt back into the countryside before Lentulus' army arrives, leaving them to find only their defeated comrades and a battlefield stripped of anything useful. It's another psychological blow to Roman pride and another boost to rebel morale. The weeks that follow bring a string of similar victories. Your rebel army, now numbering nearly 30,000, moves through the Italian countryside almost at will. More slaves join your ranks daily, and your reputation grows. Romans begin to fear traveling outside cities. Estates are abandoned as owners flee to urban centers for protection. For perhaps the first time in Roman history, slaves hold the upper hand. During this period, your own role continues to evolve. Your skill with metal makes you invaluable for maintaining weapons, but you've also proven yourself in combat and leadership. Spartacus has given you command of a group of about 50 fighters, mostly fellow Thracians and Greeks with similar backgrounds to your own. One evening, as your band makes camp after a successful raid on a Roman supply convoy, you find yourself sitting with Spartacus and other group leaders around a council fire. The discussion centers on an important question: what is the ultimate goal of your rebellion? We can't defeat all of Rome, says a Gallic leader named Brennus. They have too many legions, too many resources. We should use our strength now to break out of Italy, cross the Alps, and return to our homelands. This suggestion receives support from many, especially those from Gaul and Germanic regions to the north. The idea of returning home, of seeing families and lands that many thought lost forever, holds powerful appeal. No, counters a Syrian named Castus. We should move south instead, to Sicily. There have been successful slave revolts there before. The island is fertile, defensible, and we could build a new society there, free from Roman rule. This too finds supporters, particularly among those who have no homes to return to or who come from eastern regions too distant to practically reach. Spartacus listens to all viewpoints before offering his own. Both paths have merit, he acknowledges, but first, we must secure our position here in Italy. Rome has been humiliated, but not defeated. They will send more legions against us. Their pride and their economic system demand it. He unrolls a crude map of the Italian peninsula, pointing to various locations. Winter approaches. We need secure positions, food stores, and continued training. In the spring, we can decide whether to move north or south. The practicality of this approach wins general agreement. Your rebellion has succeeded beyond anyone's wildest hopes, but it remains fragile. One major defeat could undo everything you've accomplished. As the council disperses, you find yourself walking back to your group's campfire alongside Spartacus. The burden of leadership shows in the new lines on his face, and the watchful caution that never quite leaves his eyes. You fought well in the battle against Gellius, he says, breaking the comfortable silence between you. Your group follows you willingly. I try to lead as you do, you reply, by example rather than fear. He nods approvingly. That's the difference between us and Rome. They build with the whip and the cross. We must build with something stronger, respect, common purpose, the dignity that comes from choosing one's own path. His words articulate something you felt but couldn't express. This rebellion isn't just fighting against slavery, it's trying to create something new in its place. A community where former slaves govern themselves, where work is shared rather than coerced, where decisions come from consensus rather than command. Do you think it can last, you ask, this world we're making? Spartacus looks into the distance, his expression unreadable in the fading light. I don't know, he admits. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will its replacement be. But even if we ultimately fail, we've already succeeded in one important way. We've shown that slaves can claim their humanity, can fight for freedom, can build something worthy together. The The conversation stays with you that night as you check on your group. These men and women who follow you have transformed from broken, fearful slaves into confident fighters who look you in the eye as equals. Whatever comes next, this change cannot be undone. Winter arrives, bringing new challenges. The rebel army establishes semi-permanent camps in defensible positions throughout southern Italy. Food becomes a primary concern. Raiding can only provide so much, and many of the estates you previously targeted have been abandoned. Fortunately, many of your rebels were agricultural slaves who know how to preserve food, hunt game, and identify edible plants. Their knowledge, once used to feed their masters, now sustains your rebellion through the lean months. During this relative lull in fighting, training intensifies. Former gladiators teach fighting techniques to newer rebels. Captured Roman equipment is studied and replicated when possible. Tactics are practiced and refined. What began as a desperate breakout has evolved into a disciplined fighting force with its own unique style, combining Roman techniques with methods from the homelands of various rebel groups. You spend much of your time establishing forges in different rebel camps, teaching basic metalworking to others so that weapons can be maintained and produced. It's fulfilling to pass on your knowledge, to see skills that were once demanded of you as a slave now freely given for a cause you believe in. One brisk winter morning, as you demonstrate how to properly temper a sword blade to a group of apprentices, a commotion at the camp's edge draws your attention. Scouts are returning at a gallop, and their urgent manner suggests important news. You leave your students to their practice and make your way to the command tent where Spartacus and other leaders will hear the scouts' report. As one of the group commanders, you have the right to attend these councils now. The news is sobering. Rome has appointed Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of its wealthiest and most ambitious citizens, to end the slave rebellion once and for all. He's been granted extraordinary powers and resources, 8 full legions, about 40,000 trained soldiers, along with auxiliary forces. Crassus is different from the commanders we've faced before, explains one of the scouts, a former household slave who can read and has sources in Roman towns. He's ruthless and calculating, and he's staking his political future on defeating us. Spartacus absorbs this information with characteristic calm. We expected Rome to escalate. Now we know the form that escalation takes. Can we defeat 8 legions? Asks a Gallic commander, giving voice to the question on everyone's mind. Not in a single battle, Spartacus acknowledges, but neither can Crassus easily defeat us if we refuse to fight on his terms. We have mobility, knowledge of the terrain, and the support of local slave populations. He has numbers and equipment, but moves slowly with his legions. The strategy that emerges from this council is one of flexibility. Your forces will divide into smaller, more mobile groups when needed, rejoining for specific operations. You'll target Crassus's supply lines rather than his main force, wearing down Roman morale through constant harassment rather than decisive battle. As spring approaches, this strategy is put to the test. Crassus moves his legions methodically through southern Italy, attempting to trap rebel forces between his columns. You respond with hit-and-run tactics, ambushing isolated units, destroying bridges after your forces cross them, and generally frustrating Roman efforts to bring your main force to battle. This approach works well at first. Crassus loses men and supplies without making significant progress against your rebellion, but he adapts quickly, tightening his formations and improving his intelligence gathering. The space for your maneuvers gradually shrinks. The situation comes to a head when Crassus implements a new strategy, building fortifications across the Bruttium Peninsula, effectively cutting off your southern escape routes. With the sea on 3 sides and Roman walls blocking the north, Your army finds itself increasingly confined. Spartacus calls an emergency council. "We must break through Crassus's lines before they're completed," he says, pointing to the half-finished Roman fortifications on a map. "Once they seal the peninsula, we'll be trapped." The plan is straightforward but dangerous. Concentrate your forces for a single, powerful assault on the weakest section of Crassus's line, punch through, and escape the closing trap. It's a direct approach that abandons the hit-and-run tactics that have served you well, but necessity leaves few alternatives. The night before the planned breakout, a tense atmosphere permeates the rebel camp. Everyone understands what's at stake. If the assault fails, the rebellion might be contained and gradually crushed within the peninsula. You spend the evening checking weapons one last time, ensuring your fighters are prepared for tomorrow's battle. Among your group, you notice a mix of determination and fear. These men and women have tasted freedom and fought bravely, but they know tomorrow brings their greatest test yet. A young woman named Eleni, who joined your group after being freed from a wealthy Roman's household, approaches you with concern in her eyes. "The Romans say that captured rebels will be crucified," she says quietly. "Is it true?" You consider lying to reassure her, but decide honesty is what she deserves. Yes, that's likely. Crassus needs to make an example to discourage other slaves from joining rebellions. She nods, absorbing this grim reality. "Then we cannot be captured," she says with simple finality. "No, you agree. We fight for freedom, or we die trying. There's no middle path now." Dawn breaks cold and clear on the day of the assault. Your combined rebel forces, nearly 40,000 strong, have moved into position overnight, concealed in woods near the Roman fortifications. Across open ground, you can see Roman soldiers working on the walls, unaware of the impending attack. Spartacus himself walks among the assembled rebels, offering final words of encouragement. When he reaches your section, he clasps your arm in a warrior's grip. "Your group takes the right flank," he says. "Hit them hard and keep moving. Don't get bogged down in prolonged fighting. The goal is to break through, not to defeat every Roman we see." You nod, understanding the strategy. This isn't about winning a battle, but escaping a trap. The attack begins with a coordinated rush from the tree line. Thousands of rebels charge across open ground toward the surprised Romans. Construction workers drop tools and flee, while soldiers scramble to form defensive positions. Your group hits the Roman right flank as planned, overwhelming the hastily formed resistance through sheer numbers and momentum. For a brief, hope-filled moment, it seems the breakout will succeed easily. Then Roman reserves arrive, fresh troops held back in anticipation of just such an attack. The fighting intensifies as trained legionaries engage your rebels in disciplined formation. The initial advantage of surprise fades, replaced by a brutal test of will and strength. You find yourself in the thick of combat, directing your fighters while defending against Roman counterattacks. A centurion recognizes you as a group leader and targets you specifically, his superior weapons and armor nearly overwhelming your defenses. Only the timely intervention of two of your fighters saves you, though one falls to the centurion's blade in the process. Around you, the battle hangs in the balance. Some rebel groups have broken through, while others are pinned down by fierce Roman resistance. The cohesion of your attack begins to fracture as different sections face varying levels of success or failure. Through the chaos, you spot Spartacus leading a charge against a particularly strong section of the Roman line. His fearless example inspires those around him, and they push forward despite heavy losses. Gradually, a gap opens in the Roman defenses. There, you shout to your remaining fighters, pointing toward the breach, "Follow me." Your group fights toward the opening, joining a stream of rebels pouring through the Roman lines. Behind you, others continue to battle, sacrificing themselves to keep the escape route open for their comrades. The breakout ultimately succeeds, though at terrible cost. Perhaps a third of the rebel force is lost, killed, captured, or separated in the confusion. But the majority escapes Crassus's trap, emerging north of his fortifications with the ability to maneuver once more. That night, as the escaped rebels regroup and tend to their wounded, the mood is somber despite the tactical success. Too many friends and comrades were lost, and everyone understands that Crassus will not give up the pursuit. Spartacus calls the remaining leaders together. His face shows the strain of the day's fighting and the responsibility he carries. "We've escaped the immediate trap," he says without preamble, "but our position in southern Italy has become untenable. We must decide now, north or south." The debate that follows is passionate but respectful. Those favoring a northern route argue for crossing the Alps to freedom beyond Roman territory. Those supporting a southern strategy advocate for reaching Sicily, where mountains and the island nature could provide defensible positions. "The Alps passage will soon be clear of winter snow," argues Brennus the Gaul. "Many of us could return to our homelands. The rebellion would have succeeded for those who escape." "But what of those who cannot return home?" counters Castus. "Those from Thrace, Syria, or Africa. The journey's too far, and Roman allies control those lands anyway. Sicily offers the possibility of a new home for all." The discussion continues until Spartacus finally raises his hand for silence. "Both paths have merit," he acknowledges, "but we must choose one. We cannot remain divided against Crassus's united force." He studies the crude map before him, weighing options with the strategic mind that has kept the rebellion alive this long. "North," he decides finally. "We break out of Italy entirely. Those who wish to return to their homelands may do so. Others can remain together and establish a new community beyond Roman reach." Not everyone agrees with this decision, but most accept it as necessary. Unity has been your strength against Rome's superior numbers and equipment. Division now would doom you all. Plans are made to begin the northern march immediately. Every day of delay allows Crassus to strengthen his position and possibly cut off escape routes. Despite exhaustion from the recent battle, the rebel army prepares to move. As you organize your reduced group for the journey, you notice increasing tensions between different factions. The losses during the breakout have frayed nerves, and the decision to move north has disappointed those who favored other options. What was once a unified rebellion shows signs of fragmenting under pressure. Diona, the Greek kitchen slave who has become one of your trusted fighters, expresses these concerns as you pack supplies. "People are talking of splitting up," she says quietly. "Some of the Gauls want to move faster, break away from the main group to reach the Alps sooner. Others think Spartacus is making a mistake and still want to try for Sicily. This news troubles you." "Division would weaken us all," you reply. "Crassus would pick off smaller groups one by one." "I know," she agrees, "but fear and hope make people make desperate choices, and not everyone has the same hope anymore." You report these whispers to Spartacus that evening. He listens with a grave expression but doesn't seem surprised. "I've heard similar concerns," he admits. "The rebellion is at its most vulnerable point. We've tasted enough success to have hope, but faced enough setbacks to know fear. It's a dangerous combination." "What can we do?" you ask. He considers this question carefully before answering. "Remind them of what binds us together, not just our past as slaves, but our shared vision of freedom. The moment we separate, we become easier targets for Rome. Only together do we have a chance." You take this message back to your group, and other leaders do the same with theirs. For a time, it seems to strengthen resolve and maintain unity. The Northern March begins with the entire rebel force moving as one. Crassus, however, proves relentless in his pursuit. His legions move with surprising speed for such a large force, always pressing at your rear, forcing you to maintain pace without adequate rest. Smaller Roman units harass your flanks, picking off stragglers and testing your defenses. The constant pressure takes its toll. Food supplies dwindle as you have less time to forage or raid. Weapons break and cannot always be properly repaired. Exhaustion leads to mistakes and accidents. Children and elderly rebels, who had been part of your community since the beginning, struggle with the demanding pace. About 2 weeks into the march north, the tensions that had been simmering finally boil over. A large contingent of Gauls and Germans, perhaps 10,000 strong, announces their intention to separate from the main force and make their own way to the Alps. Their leader, a German former gladiator named Castus, explains their reasoning to Spartacus. "We can move faster without the wounded and children," he says bluntly. "The Alps are our homeland. We know the paths, the passes. Together with your people, we're a larger target for Crassus. Separate, at least some of us might slip through." Spartacus argues against this division, emphasizing the strength and unity that has brought the rebellion this far, but the northern rebels have made their decision. That night, they depart the main camp, taking their fighters and supplies with them. Their separation proves disastrous. Within days, scouts bring news that Crassus divided his forces, sending his lieutenant Gnaeus Pompeius Rufus to intercept the breakaway group. Caught on open ground and without the full strength of the combined rebel army, the Gauls and Germans were surrounded and annihilated. Few, if any, escaped. This news sends a wave of grief and fear through your remaining forces. Not only have you lost valuable fighters and friends, but the defeat demonstrates what happens to rebels who face Roman legions without adequate strength. Spartacus gathers everyone for a somber address. "We mourn our fallen comrades," he begins, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "They fought bravely for freedom, as we all have. Their choice to separate was their right. We are not Romans to command others against their will." He pauses, letting his next words carry full weight. "But their fate shows what we have always known. Our strength lies in unity. Together, we have defeated Roman armies that should have crushed us easily. Divided, we fall one by one. The loss of the northern rebels forces a reconsideration of your strategy. With reduced numbers, continuing north seems increasingly risky. Scouts report that another Roman general, Pompey, is moving down from the north with his legions, while Lucullus has landed in Brundisium with a third army. The trap is closing from multiple directions, and your options narrow by the day. In this desperate moment, Spartacus proposes a bold plan. If we cannot go north or south, we go where they least expect, toward Rome itself. The suggestion creates a stir among the gathered leaders. Attack Rome, the very heart of the empire that enslaved you? It seems like madness. Not to conquer it, Spartacus clarifies, seeing the shocked reactions. We lack the numbers and equipment for that, but to threaten it, to bring the fear they've cast over us back to their doorstep. While they worry about protecting the capital, we can find another path to freedom. It's a psychological strategy as much as a military one, using Rome's political concerns against it. The Senate would never allow rebel slaves to approach the sacred city, even if your force couldn't actually take it. They would recall troops, redirect resources, create openings elsewhere. The plan carries enormous risk, but also offers a final chance to escape the closing Roman noose. With few alternatives, the rebel leadership agrees to this desperate gambit. Your diminished but still formidable force, perhaps 30,000 strong, changes direction, moving northwest toward Rome itself. The sudden shift catches Crassus by surprise, forcing him to adjust his own plans and giving you precious time to gain ground. As you march, your scouts bring reports of panic spreading through Roman territories ahead of you. Wealthy citizens flee with their valuables. Slave owners, terrified that their human property will join your rebellion, either free their slaves preemptively or kill them outright rather than risk betrayal. The countryside empties as rural populations seek the safety of walled towns. This is the fear that Rome has inspired in others for centuries, now reflected back on its creators. There's a grim satisfaction in this reversal, even as you recognize that your march is more symbolic than genuinely threatening to Rome's existence. For a brief, heady moment, it seems the strategy might work. Crassus is forced to adjust his pursuit. Roman forces are repositioned to protect the capital, and potential escape routes begin to appear in the shifting military landscape. Then, disaster strikes. Your scouts, who had reported the way ahead relatively clear, return with alarming news. 2 fresh legions under the command of Pompey have arrived from the north, positioning themselves between your forces and Rome. Simultaneously, Crassus has recovered from his initial surprise and is closing rapidly from behind. The trap Spartacus sought to avoid has materialized anyway, more complete than before. Your rebel army finds itself caught between 2 powerful Roman forces with limited options for escape. That night, the rebel council meets in an atmosphere of grim determination. The situation is dire, perhaps hopeless, but surrender isn't considered. Everyone knows what fate awaits: captured rebels, crucifixion along the Appian Way as a warning to other slaves who might consider rebellion. We have one chance, Spartacus says, studying the map illuminated by flickering lamplight. We cannot defeat both armies, but perhaps we can break through one before they fully coordinate their movements. The plan that forms is to concentrate all remaining strength against Crassus's force, attempt to shatter his lines, and escape before Pompey can respond. It's similar to the breakout from the southern peninsula, but with even higher stakes and against more formidable opposition. As the council disperses to prepare their groups for tomorrow's battle, Spartacus asks you to remain behind. When you're alone, he speaks with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Tomorrow will likely be our final battle," he says quietly. "Not all of us will survive, perhaps none of us." You nod, having already accepted this reality. We've known this might be the outcome since we first escaped the ludus. Yes, he agrees, but knowing doesn't make the choice easier. He meets your eyes directly. If I fall tomorrow, someone must carry on the spirit of what we've built, even if the rebellion itself is defeated. You understand what he's asking, not for you to take command, necessarily, but to survive if possible, to ensure that the story of the rebellion lives on, that future generations of slaves might know that freedom is possible. "I'll do what I can," you promise, "though I'd rather fight at your side to the end." Spartacus clasps your shoulder, as would I, but sometimes living requires more courage than dying. He hands you a small object, a simple iron ring made from a broken slave collar. "I had this made from the first collar I broke. Keep it if you survive. Remember what we fought for." The gesture moves you deeply. This small circle of metal represents everything the rebellion has stood for, the transformation of tools of oppression into symbols of freedom. You spend the night checking weapons one final time and speaking with your fighters. No grand speeches are needed. Everyone understands what tomorrow brings. Instead, you share quiet conversations about homes left behind, dreams of freedom, and the community you've built together despite Rome's efforts to keep you isolated and broken. Dawn arrives with a pale light that does little to warm the spring air. The rebel army assembles in battle formation, every able-bodied person armed as well as possible. Even the wounded who can stand take positions, preferring to die fighting rather than await capture. Across the field, Crassus's legions form their own lines, disciplined, well-equipped, and confident. 8 legions against your remaining forces. The odds are overwhelming, but you've overcome Roman armies before. Spartacus rides along the rebel front line, his presence bolstering courage. When he reaches the center, he addresses everyone within earshot. "Today, we face Rome's legions one final time," he calls, his voice strong and clear. "They think us simply slaves in revolt. They're wrong. We are free people fighting to remain free." A cheer rises from the rebel ranks, defiant in the face of possible annihilation. "Remember this," Spartacus continues. "No matter what happens today, we have already won a victory they can never take away. We have shown that slaves can break their chains, can build a community based on dignity rather than domination, can defeat the armies sent to subjugate them." He draws his sword, sunlight glinting off the blade. "Even if we fall today, others will remember what we did. Other slaves will dream of freedom because we showed it was possible. Rome may defeat our bodies, but they cannot defeat what we've awakened." With these words still echoing, he turns toward the Roman lines and gives the signal to advance. The final battle of the Great Slave Rebellion begins with a surge of humanity moving across the field toward an uncertain fate. You lead your group forward, moving at a steady pace alongside thousands of your comrades. For better or worse, your long journey from slave to rebel fighter will reach its conclusion today, beneath the Italian sun, on a battlefield that history will remember long after you're gone. The clash of armies echoes across the plain as rebel and Roman forces collide in a desperate tangle of bodies, weapons, and raw determination. The disciplined Roman formations begin to fragment under the sheer ferocity of your attack, slaves fighting not just for victory, but for survival itself. Your group drives forward into a unit of Roman auxiliaries, fighting with the coordination developed over months of training and combat. The good news is that the initial momentum carries you through the first Roman line. The bad news is that Crassus has prepared his forces in depth, with fresh troops ready to replace those who fall. Through gaps in the combat, you catch glimpses of other parts of the battlefield. Some rebel groups are making progress, punching holes in the Roman lines. Others are being pushed back, overwhelmed by superior numbers and equipment. The outcome hangs in balance, with neither side clearly prevailing. Then you see him, Spartacus, fighting at the center of the rebel line, pressing forward toward Crassus himself. His goal is clear. If he can kill or capture the Roman commander, the legions might falter long enough for your forces to break through. Roman officers recognize this threat and concentrate their elite troops against Spartacus and his immediate followers. The fighting there intensifies, becoming the focal point of the entire battle. You try to push your group in that direction, hoping to reinforce Spartacus, but a fresh century of Roman soldiers blocks your path. The centurion, his helmet crest marking him clearly as an officer, points at you specifically and shouts orders to his men. Your reputation as a rebel leader has apparently made you a target. What follows is the most intense fighting you've experienced yet. The Romans attack with discipline and skill, their training evident in every movement. Your fighters respond with the desperate courage of those who know defeat means death or re-enslavement. A Roman javelin grazes your shoulder, drawing blood but not disabling you. You counter by ducking under a sword thrust, and driving your own blade into a legionary's unprotected side. Another Roman immediately takes his place. Crassus' legions seem endless, while your numbers dwindle with each fallen rebel. For what feels like hours but is likely only minutes, the fighting continues with neither side gaining clear advantage. Your arms grow heavy, your breathing labored, but stopping means death. Around you, both rebels and Romans fall, the ground becoming treacherous with blood and bodies. Then a shout goes up from the center of the battlefield, not of victory, but of anguish. Through the chaos, you see Spartacus surrounded by Romans, fighting with incredible skill, but gradually overwhelmed by sheer numbers. He kills several before a spear takes him in the leg, forcing him to one knee. Even wounded, he continues fighting, Roman soldiers falling to his blade. But the outcome is inevitable. More Romans press in, and finally, a sword thrust finds its mark. Spartacus, the gladiator who led the greatest slave rebellion Rome had ever faced, falls on the battlefield. A cry of dismay rises from rebel fighters who witness his fall. For many, Spartacus represented not just leadership, but hope itself, the living proof that a slave could rise up, could fight back, could briefly taste freedom in a world determined to deny it. The Romans, sensing victory, press their advantage with renewed vigor. Rebel lines begin to crumble in places as fighters either fall or retreat in disarray. What had been a cohesive battle plan dissolves into isolated pockets of resistance. You gather your remaining fighters, perhaps 15 of the 50 you started with, and try to maintain formation. "Stay together," you shout above the din of battle. "It's our only chance." Diona, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead but still fighting, catches your eye. "Which way?" she calls back. "Where do we go now?" It's the question everyone faces in this moment of crisis. Without Spartacus, without a clear path to break through the Roman lines, what is the objective? Fight to the death here? Try to escape individually? Surrender and face crucifixion? You make your decision quickly, based on what you believe Spartacus would have wanted. "We fight toward the eastern flank," you tell your group. "The Romans are thinner there. If we break through, head for the forests, scatter and regroup when possible." It's not a plan for victory. That hope died with Spartacus, but a plan for survival, for carrying the memory and meaning of the rebellion forward. Some of you must live to tell the story, to keep the spirit of resistance alive. Your reduced group fights with desperate energy toward the eastern edge of the battlefield. Other rebels see your movement and join your effort, creating a concentrated thrust that temporarily pushes back the Roman line. For a brief, hope-filled moment, it seems your breakout might succeed. The Roman forces on this flank waver, not expecting such organized resistance after Spartacus's fall. A gap appears, not large, but perhaps enough for some to escape through. "Now," you shout, pointing toward the opening. "Run!" Your fighters surge forward, abandoning organized combat for a headlong dash toward potential freedom. Romans try to close the gap, but momentum carries your group through. You're past the main battle line, running with every remaining ounce of strength toward the distant tree line. Behind you, the sounds of battle continue as many rebels fight on, either unaware of the escape route or choosing to stand their ground to the end. Their sacrifice provides crucial time for you and others to increase the distance from pursuit. Your lungs burn and your wounded shoulder throbs with each stride, but you don't slow down. Romans are surely following, and only reaching the forest offers any hope of evading capture. Diona runs beside you, as do perhaps 20 other rebels who managed to break through. The rest of your group either fell in the fighting or became separated in the chaos of escape. You hope some found other routes to safety, but fear many have fallen. Finally, the trees envelop you, providing welcome cover from Roman eyes. Only then do you allow a brief pause, gulping air into burning lungs while listening for sounds of pursuit. Spread out. You instruct between breaths. Groups of 3 or 4. Harder to track. Better chance some survive. No one argues with this logic. Large groups are easier to spot and capture. Smaller units might slip through the net. Crassus is surely casting across the countryside. Before separating, you share a moment of solemn acknowledgement with these fighters who have shared so much. No lengthy farewells are needed. The bond forged through your struggle speaks for itself. Remember what we fought for, you tell them, echoing Spartacus's words. If you survive, carry the truth of it with you. We were not simply rebels. We were people reclaiming our humanity. With these parting words, your band disperses into the forest, each small group choosing different directions in hopes that some might evade the Roman hunters. You travel with Diona and a young Thracian named Lysander, moving carefully through wooded terrain, avoiding roads and open areas. The good news is that all 3 of you know how to live off the land, skills learned in your homeland and honed during the rebellion. The bad news is that Crassus is unlikely to abandon the pursuit while rebel leaders remain free. Your fears prove well-founded. By nightfall, the distant horizon glows with the light of hundreds of torches, Roman search parties methodically combing the countryside for escaped rebels. They're using a cordon strategy, Lysander observes grimly, tightening a circle of soldiers around the entire area. They did this in Thrace after uprisings. You nod, recognizing the tactic. We need to move at night, hide during day, find a way through their lines before they close completely. The next days become a dangerous game of cat and mouse. You travel only in darkness, using stars for navigation, heading generally east toward the coast. During daylight, you hide in thickets, caves, or abandoned buildings, always alert for Roman patrols. Occasionally, you glimpse other rebels attempting similar escapes. Some you recognize from your time together. Others are strangers who joined the rebellion later. You avoid contact when possible. Larger groups leave more obvious signs of passage, but sometimes exchange whispered information about Roman movements when paths cross. Food becomes increasingly scarce as you move through areas already picked clean by either rebels or Romans. Water, at least, is plentiful from streams and springs, but hunger gradually weakens your small group. On the 4th night after the battle, disaster strikes. Moving through a supposedly empty farmstead, you trigger a trap set by Romans specifically for escaping rebels. A hidden sentry raises the alarm, and suddenly torches flare around you as soldiers emerge from concealed positions. Run, you shout to Diona and Lysander, drawing your sword to buy them time. Split up. Remember what we promised. The Romans focus on you as the apparent leader, allowing your companions to slip away in different directions. You fight briefly, disabling 2 soldiers before making your own escape into the darkness. Behind you, shouts and the sounds of pursuit fade as you use every evasion technique learned during the rebellion. By dawn, you've put significant distance between yourself and the Roman patrol, but at a cost. You're alone now, separated from Diona and Lysander, with no way to know if they escaped or were captured. And you've been forced westward, away from your planned route to the coast. Exhaustion and hunger cloud your thinking as you seek a hiding place for the day. An abandoned shepherd's hut, partially collapsed but offering some concealment, becomes your sanctuary. As you settle into the darkest corner, checking your wounded shoulder which has begun to show signs of infection, the full weight of recent events crashes down upon you. Spartacus is dead. The rebellion, which held such promise and achieved so much, has been crushed. Most of your fellow rebels, Friends and comrades who shared your dreams of freedom are either dead or captured, facing gruesome execution, and you're alone, hunted, with diminishing chances of escape. For the first time since your initial enslavement, despair threatens to overwhelm you. The road ahead seems impossible. Even if you somehow evade capture, where would you go? What kind of life could you build as a fugitive in a world dominated by Rome? As these dark thoughts spiral, your hand touches something in your tattered clothing. The iron ring Spartacus gave you, forged from a broken slave collar. You pull it out, examining it in the dim light, filtering through the collapsed roof. This simple object carries powerful meaning. It represents the transition from slavery to freedom, from submission to resistance. Spartacus entrusted it to you not just as a memento, but as a responsibility to remember and carry forward what the rebellion represented, regardless of its military outcome. With renewed resolve, you slip the ring onto your finger and force yourself to think practically about survival. The infection in your shoulder needs treatment. You need food and better shelter, and you need a plan beyond simple evasion. Using knowledge gained during the rebellion, you locate herbs known for their antibiotic properties and create a poultice for your wound. It's painful but necessary. An infected injury will kill you as surely as Roman soldiers if left untreated. For food, you set simple snares, catching a rabbit that provides the first real nourishment in days. The meat, though barely cooked over a tiny smokeless fire, restores some strength to your depleted body. As your physical condition improves over the next 2 days, you consider your options carefully. The Romans are still searching the countryside, but their cordon must have gaps. No army can maintain a perfect line across miles of terrain. You decide to continue moving by night, but adjust your direction southward. While the coast remains your ultimate goal, the heaviest Roman presence likely guards the most direct routes east. A circuitous path might offer better chances. This strategy proves sound. As you move through hills and forests, Roman patrols become less frequent. They're concentrating their efforts closer to the battlefield, assuming most rebels would head directly away from the fighting. Nearly 2 weeks after the final battle, you reach a small coastal town, disguised in clothes taken from an abandoned farm and with your weapons hidden. You blend in with local workers, listening carefully to rumors and news. What you learn is sobering. Crassus has been thorough in his victory. Thousands of captured rebels have been crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies left hanging as a warning to other slaves who might consider rebellion. Spartacus's body was never found, though most assume he died in battle. A few rebel leaders apparently escaped, as substantial rewards are offered for their capture. Your name is among those mentioned: Thracius the blacksmith, commander under Spartacus, wanted by Rome. The good news is that no one in this coastal town would recognize you as that rebel leader. The bad news is that Roman officials everywhere are alert for escaping rebels, making sea passage difficult to arrange. For several days, you work odd jobs around the harbor, earning small coins while observing ship movements and security procedures. Maritime trade connects the entire Mediterranean world, and vessels continuously arrive from and depart to distant ports, Alexandria, Athens, Carthage, and beyond. If you can secure passage on one of these ships, escape from Roman territory becomes possible. Fortune finally favors you when a merchant vessel from Syria docks for repairs and resupply. Unlike Roman ships, foreign merchants are less concerned with political matters and more interested in practical skills. When you demonstrate your knowledge of metalwork by helping repair a broken anchor chain, the ship's captain takes notice. You know your way around a forge, he comments, watching you work. Not common among dock laborers. I was a blacksmith before. You hesitate, careful not to reveal too much. Before circumstances changed, the captain, a weathered man named Adad with the distinctive accent of the Eastern Mediterranean, studies you thoughtfully. We lost our ship's metalworker to fever in Neapolis. There's work for someone with your skills if you're looking to travel. It's the opportunity you've been waiting for, though caution is still necessary. Where does your ship sail to next? Antioch? Then perhaps Alexandria, depending on trade conditions, Adad replies. Far from Roman concerns, if that's what worries you. His perceptiveness is unsettling, but not surprising. A merchant captain survives by reading people and situations accurately, and in these days following the slave rebellion, many are fleeing Roman reprisals for various reasons. I can pay my passage with work, you offer, avoiding direct confirmation of his suspicion. Adad nods. Be at the ship before dawn tomorrow. We sail with the morning tide. No questions about your past, but I expect honest work and loyalty while you're aboard. That night, as you prepare for departure, you reflect on the journey that brought you to this moment. From Thracian freeman to Roman slave to rebel fighter, and now fugitive seeking distant shores. Your life has transformed repeatedly in ways you could never have imagined. The rebellion failed in its immediate military objectives. Spartacus is dead, most rebels have been killed or recaptured, and the Roman slave system continues uninterrupted. But something has changed nevertheless, a demonstration that slaves can organize, can fight back, can create a community based on mutual respect rather than ownership and fear. This knowledge can never be fully erased despite Rome's brutal repression. It will live in whispered stories among the enslaved, in cautious policies by slave owners suddenly aware of their vulnerability, in the memory of those few like yourself who survived to carry the truth forward. Before dawn, you board the Syrian vessel with your few possessions, including the iron ring that symbolizes everything you've experienced. As the ship raises anchor and catches the morning breeze, the Italian coastline gradually recedes. With it goes the immediate threat of Roman capture, though you understand that Rome's influence extends throughout the known world. True safety might never be fully achieved. Standing at the rail, watching Italy disappear into the distance, you consider what lies ahead. Perhaps you'll practice your blacksmith trade in eastern cities. Perhaps you'll find others who escaped the rebellion and build a new community. Perhaps you'll eventually find a way to continue fighting against slavery in different forms. Whatever path you choose, you carry with you the experience of having been both a slave and truly free. You understand, in ways few others can, both the crushing weight of bondage and the exhilarating responsibility of liberty. This knowledge, this lived truth, is perhaps the most valuable thing to emerge from the tragedy and triumph of Spartacus's rebellion. As open water surrounds the ship and a new chapter of your life begins, you touch the iron ring once more. It reminds you that though chains can bind the body, the human spirit retains the capacity for resistance, for dignity, for freedom against seemingly impossible odds. And that is a legacy worth preserving, worth carrying forward into whatever future awaits. The Mediterranean sun warms your face as you turn from Italy toward the eastern horizon. Behind you lies the defeat of the rebellion. Before you lies uncertainty, but also possibility. And within you lives the memory of what was accomplished, however briefly, a community of the formerly enslaved who chose their own path, who fought for their humanity, who showed that another way of living was possible. In that memory lies the true victory of Spartacus's rebellion, one that even mighty Rome, with all its legions, could never fully erase. As the Syrian ship sails eastward, you find yourself falling into the rhythm of maritime life. The vessel, named Astarte after an Eastern goddess, carries a diverse crew representing the multicultural nature of Mediterranean trade. Phoenicians, Greeks, Egyptians, and others, Work together under Captain Adad's firm but fair command. Your skills as a metalworker make you valuable aboard ship, where hardware constantly needs repair due to the corrosive effects of salt water. Beyond essential maintenance, you create improved tools that earn appreciation from the crew. This practical contribution helps you gradually integrate into this floating community. Several weeks into the voyage, after stops at various ports for trade, the ship docks at Alexandria in Egypt. This famous city, founded by Alexander the Great and renowned for its lighthouse and library, represents a center of learning and commerce distinct from Rome's military emphasis. Captain Adad, pleased with your work during the journey, offers continuing employment. We sail regularly between Alexandria, Antioch, and other eastern ports, he explains. There's a place for you if you want it. The offer is tempting. Life at sea would keep you mobile and make it harder for Roman authorities to track you. But something about Alexandria calls to you. Perhaps it's the city's reputation for knowledge and philosophical inquiry, or simply the opportunity to put roots down after so much upheaval. I think I'll stay here for a while, you tell him. But I'm grateful for the passage and the opportunity. Adad nods understandingly. If you change your mind, ask for me at the harbor master's office. Ships always need good metal workers. With this parting, you step into the bustling streets of Alexandria, a free person in a city where Romans have influence but not direct control. Egypt remains nominally independent under its Ptolemaic rulers, though increasingly under Roman sway. Still, it offers more safety than anywhere in Italy could provide. Alexandria's famous library draws scholars from throughout the known world, creating an atmosphere of intellectual exchange rarely found elsewhere. Although you're no scholar, you find yourself drawn to public lectures and discussions held in the shadow of academic institutions. It's during one such gathering that you meet Apollodorus, an elderly Greek philosopher who takes interest in your thoughtful questions. Learning that you're a metalworker seeking employment, he introduces you to contacts who help establish you in a modest workshop near the harbor. As your business slowly grows, providing basic metalwork for ships and local needs, Apollodorus becomes a regular visitor. Your conversations range widely, from practical matters to philosophical questions about freedom, governance, and human nature. Eventually, inevitably, he asks about the iron ring you always wear, clearly not decorative, but seemingly important to you. After months in Alexandria, with some distance from the immediate trauma of the rebellion, you decide to trust him with a version of your story. I was part of Spartacus's rebellion, you admit quietly, watching carefully for his reaction. This ring was made from a slave collar. It reminds me of what we fought for, what was possible for a brief time. Apollodorus absorbs this information with the measured consideration of a trained philosopher. I've heard accounts of that rebellion, he says, most written by Romans, of course, portraying it simply as dangerous criminal activity, but I've wondered what those who participated might say about their motivations and experiences. His genuine interest encourages you to share more details, not tactical information that might endanger others if repeated, but the human aspects of the rebellion. You describe how slaves from diverse backgrounds formed a community based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy, how decisions were made through discussion rather than command, how people contributed according to their abilities rather than under threat of punishment. It wasn't perfect, you acknowledge. We faced many challenges, disagreements, difficulties in organization, but it was real freedom, messy, demanding, sometimes frightening in its responsibility, but genuine self-determination after years of having every aspect of life controlled by masters. Apollodorus listens intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never judging or dismissing your experience. When you finish speaking, he remains thoughtful for some time. What you describe has philosophical significance beyond the military aspects that concern the Romans, he finally says. Questions of natural freedom versus conventional slavery, of community formation outside traditional structures, of human capacity for self-governance. These have been debated in academic circles for generations, but you've lived these questions in ways most philosophers only theorize about. In the months that follow, your conversations with Apollodorus deepen. He introduces you to writings of various philosophers who have questioned conventional social structures, including slavery. Some, like certain Stoics, argue that slavery of the body doesn't necessarily enslave the mind or spirit. Others, more radical, suggest that slavery itself contradicts natural law. These intellectual explorations provide a framework for understanding your own experiences. The rebellion was not just a military uprising, but part of a larger human questioning of social arrangements that treat some people as property. Gradually, Apollodorus encourages you to record your experiences and reflections. History is written by the victorious and powerful, he notes. The Roman account of Spartacus's rebellion will dominate unless other perspectives are preserved. Though initially reluctant, writing isn't your natural medium, and recording your involvement carries risks. You eventually agree. Under Apollodorus's guidance, you dictate your memories of the rebellion, from your enslavement through the final battle and escape. A trusted scribe creates scrolls that Apollodorus promises to preserve within Alexandria's scholarly community. This may not circulate widely in our lifetime, he acknowledges, but it ensures that future generations will have access to more than just the Roman perspective on what Spartacus and his followers attempted. The process of recording your experiences proves unexpectedly healing, articulating what the rebellion meant, not just what happened, but why it mattered, helps transform personal trauma into meaningful history. The military defeat remains painful, but the significance of what was briefly created takes clearer shape in your understanding. Years pass in Alexandria. Your metalworking business provides modest prosperity. You form friendships, particularly among the city's artisan community. Occasionally, you encounter others who participated in the rebellion and escaped, each with their own journey and story of survival. These reunions, though bittersweet, reinforce that you're not alone in carrying the memory of what transpired. News from Rome filters through trade networks and travelers' accounts. Crassus leveraged his victory over Spartacus to enhance his political position, eventually forming the first triumvirate with Pompey and Julius Caesar. The Roman Republic continues its gradual transformation into an empire with increasing centralization of power. More personally relevant, you learn that the brutal suppression of Spartacus's rebellion led to minor reforms in slave treatment within Roman territories. Some of the most extreme practices are now discouraged, if not officially prohibited. It's far from the freedom you fought for, but represents tacit acknowledgement that treating humans as mere property invites resistance. One evening, nearly a decade after arriving in Alexandria, you host a small gathering at your home to mark the anniversary of the final battle. Present are 3 others who fought in the rebellion and somehow escaped: a Gallic woman who stowed away on a grain ship, a Syrian man who bribed his way onto a merchant vessel similar to your own escape route, and most surprisingly, Diona, the Greek woman separated from you during that desperate flight through the forest. Your reunion with Diona brings both joy and painful memories. After escaping the Romans that night, she eventually made her way to Athens, then Alexandria, surviving through determination and adaptability. Like you, she built a new life while carrying the experience of the rebellion within her. As the four of you share wine and memories, the conversation turns to whether your struggle ultimately mattered, given its military failure and the continuation of slavery throughout the Roman world. "We lost the battle," says the Syrian, Cassius, who now works as a scribe in Alexandria's administrative offices. "Spartacus died, most of our comrades were crucified, and slavery continues. What did we really accomplish?" Diona, now a respected healer in Alexandria's Greek quarter, responds thoughtfully, "We showed what was possible. For nearly 2 years, thousands of people from different lands, speaking different languages, lived together as equals. We governed ourselves without masters, made decisions collectively, distributed resources fairly. That community existed, and knowing it was possible changes something fundamental. And we forced Rome to recognize our humanity, even if only through their fear," adds the Gaul, Bridget, who married an Egyptian merchant and manages part of his trading business. They had to acknowledge that slaves weren't just talking tools, but people capable of organization, strategy, community building. You consider their perspectives while turning the iron ring on your finger, your talisman and reminder. Perhaps the most important victory wasn't on any battlefield, you suggest. It was in the transformation of how we saw ourselves and each other. We entered the rebellion as broken people defined by our enslavement. We became something more, people capable of freedom in its fullest sense, with all its responsibilities and possibilities. This anniversary gathering becomes an annual tradition among rebel survivors in Alexandria. Never large, perhaps a dozen participants at most, as more escaped rebels find their way to the city. These commemorations serve to preserve the memory and meaning of what you experienced together. As decades pass, you watch Alexandria and the wider Mediterranean world transform. Rome's influence grows, the Republic officially becomes an empire under Augustus, and new philosophical and religious movements emerge across the region. Through it all, you maintain your small metalworking business, eventually training apprentices to continue the craft as age limits your own physical capabilities. Apollodorus passes away, but not before ensuring that your account of the rebellion is preserved within academic circles. Occasionally, scholars seek you out, curious about your first-hand experience in an event that has already become semi-mythological in popular understanding. In your 7th decade, long after most who fought alongside Spartacus have gone to their graves, a promising young scholar named Plutarch visits Alexandria from Greece. Researching material for his biographical works, he specifically seeks information about Spartacus beyond the Roman accounts. Despite your advanced age, your mind remains sharp, your memories clear. You share with Plutarch not just facts about battles and movements, but insights into Spartacus as a leader and the community you collectively built. He wasn't seeking to become a king or ruler, you explain to the attentive young biographer. He could have claimed such power easily, given his skills and the loyalty he commanded, but he consistently worked to build consensus, to encourage others to think and decide for themselves, to create something new rather than merely invert the existing power structure. Plutarch takes careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that reveal his scholar's attention to detail. Most Roman accounts portray him simply as a dangerous rebel, or at best a formidable military opponent, he observes. A few mention these aspects of his leadership or vision. History is written by the victors, you reply, echoing Apollodorus's words from decades earlier. Rome couldn't acknowledge that slaves might create a functioning society based on principles other than domination without undermining their entire social order. As Plutarch prepares to leave, He thanks you for providing perspectives absent from official accounts. Your testimony adds dimensions to the historical record that would otherwise be lost, he says. Future generations will have a more complete understanding because you survived to share this truth. His words reaffirm what you've long believed, that perhaps your most important role wasn't as a fighter in the rebellion itself, but as a keeper of its memory and meaning. Survival, which sometimes felt like a lesser path than dying alongside Spartacus and others in that final battle, served a crucial purpose in preserving what might otherwise have been entirely erased or distorted.